Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument, hosted by the militant, Marxist, anti-Santa, Martin Bradbury. The Bradbury Group is streamed live on Rover, Sky TV, YouTube and Facebook. Proudly sponsored by Wātea, journalism you can trust. Let the arguments begin.
Kia ora Aotearoa, the true demarcation of power in a late-stage capitalism, liberal, progressive democracy is the 1% richest plus their 9% enablers versus the 90% rest of us. Welcome to the Bradbury Group Election 26, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. I'm your host, the editor of the daily blog, Martin Bradbury. Bomber to my comrades, Mr. Bradbury if you're nasty. My pronouns are us and we. Coming up on this evening's show, the political panel all-stars tonight are Te Pāti Māori President John Tamihere, Labour Party Finance Spokesperson Barbara Edmonds, and New Zealand Herald columnist, academic and political commentator Matthew Hooton. Tonight's 1-on-1 in 10 is leader of the Labour Party and leader of the opposition, Chris Hipkins, to discuss this government's lack of leadership during the fuel crisis and what New Zealand should be doing on the global stage when it comes to the war in Iran. Shout out to Kiwi Skirt and Chewy from BHN moderating tonight's YouTube page. Good evening to all the Bradbury Easters online watching right now. Your comments will appear on screen as we go. Shout out to our Wātea, Facebook, Rover, Spotify, Apple Podcast and Sky TV whānau. Remember to like and subscribe because that's all that's holding the fourth estate together right now. And our Twitter panel this evening is Tim Selwyn. He'll be tweeting live online at Twitter, hashtag the Bradbury Group. Before all that, however, is this week's War on News. Brothers and sisters, it's week 6 of Donald's illegal war on Iran, and right now we stand on the eve of destruction, with the president promising to commit war crimes by bombing civilian infrastructure back into the Stone Age. And when challenged on how he would get around the illegality of committing war crimes, he said, you'll love this, they wouldn't be war crimes because, and I quote, they are animals. Just pause and let that sink in. According to Donald, bombing Iranians wouldn't be a war crime because they are subhuman. Okay. Firstly, I'm no legal expert, but I don't think international law works like that. You can't simply shrug off war crimes by arguing that the people you are bombing are animals and thus technically not humans, thus no war crime. I wouldn't use that as your opening defense. Secondly, holy shitballs. This country sent thousands of our granddads and great-granddads to fight World War II against regimes that racially ranked others as subhuman. Hearing the President of the United States argue that the civilian infrastructure he's about to bomb isn't technically a war crime because the people he's bombing are animals and not human is a tad concerning and disgusting and terrifying and obscene and horrifying and sickening, etc., etc., etc. Talking of holy shitballs, Israel just passed a law legalizing race-based executions. I know. Race-based executions. The law will make it legal to execute Palestinians, but not Israelis. I know. You know who else was really big on race-based executions? I know. I think that when you brutally oppress a people, it's not just the people being oppressed who become mutilated, it's the people who are doing the oppression who also get warped. Hate begets hate. And finally this week, talking of hate begetting hate, as New Zealand faces the worst energy crisis in the modern era with diesel set to run dry next month, out of the biscuit tin comes a New Zealand first law suggestion that manages to highlight how unbelievably petty Winston has become, with New Zealand first demanding to legally define what a woman is. Look, I appreciate for many Kiwis the dynamics of gender is a tad scary, and that the middle class welly woke did themselves and the trans movement no favours with their insane cancel culture lynch mobs that generated so much animosity. But Indulging in culture war revenge fantasies is not how you run a bloody country in the middle of a crisis. This is exactly like New Zealand First making English a formal language of New Zealand garbage. It's pointless culture war grandstanding from people who would gleefully burn books. I don't wish to judge a person by the colour of their neck, but wow, that's crimson. Comrades, friends, don't let friends vote New Zealand First. The political panel all-stars up shortly, whānau, but first this week's 1-on-1 in 10 with leader of the Labour Party, Chris Hipkins. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show and thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate. Your democracy is grateful, Chippy.
Great to talk to you, Bomber, as always. And hey, look, I discovered as I was listening to your introduction that you do have something in common with Winston Peters.
Let's hear it.
You both use us and we as your pronouns.
Chris, I put to you that the government is exhibiting political paralysis in the face of what has been described by the head of the IEA as an energy crisis worse than the 1970s oil shock and Ukrainian war combined, because National's entire election narrative is that we are in this economic position because Labour fecklessly spent on COVID, which is why they are sitting on their hands as Kiwis get beaten to a pulp at the petrol pump. We need solutions, not excuses, don't we?
Well, the problem with the National Party believing its own lies is that they're now trying to turn that into government policy. New Zealanders actually want some certainty about what's going to happen here. Is inflation going to spike back to the levels that it was when they said it was all the government's fault and it was nothing to do with international factors? Because that'll highlight the fact, they don't want to admit that because that'll highlight the fact that they were wrong in the first place. But also, what are they going to actually do in the event that we do start to run short of fuel and there have to be some really difficult choices about who gets access to it? Kiwis need to know that information now so that they can make plans. Those who are essential businesses and essential workers and essential services, they need to know that now. And if they're not, they need to know that now as well so they can make other plans.
I want to circle back to National's election narrative. If it is true that Labour borrowing during a once-in-a-century pandemic is the reason why we are facing economic hardship, why is National borrowing more than Labour did?
Well, this is the thing, they believe their own lies. And the reality here is Nicola Willis is borrowing more money. The government's debt is getting bigger. The deficit is getting bigger. More people have lost their jobs. The cost of living is continuing to get higher. The National Party came into office without a plan. All they have is blame and excuses. Every time they're asked a tough question, their default position is to say, oh, it's all Labour's fault. No. It's 2.5 years since the last election, and they still have nothing to show positively on their own side of the ledger.
The last tanker is now out of the refineries, meaning we run dry of diesel on May 22nd. Shouldn't we be actively looking at lowering the speed limit from 100 to 80, working from home mandates for public servants, free public transport, and immediate diesel rationing?
Well, the International Energy Agency issued some guidance weeks ago saying this is what they're expecting countries to do. Most of the things you just mentioned are on that list of things that they're already asking countries to do now. And our government's got their head buried in the sand. They're saying nothing to see here. The reality here is if it all catches up with us, they're not prepared for that. They haven't gone through the exercise of figuring out what are we going to do if fuel starts to run short. Their plan seems to be to hope for the best.
Yes.
Now we can all hope for the best. That's no problem with that. But you've got to plan for the worst, and then of course hope that it doesn't happen.
We are less than 24 hours away from President Trump's bewildering boast to bomb Iranian civilian infrastructure in what would be a clear breach of international law, and many legal academics have already argued would be a war crime. His justification that he would be inoculated from prosecution because the people he is bombing are animals is an extraordinary comment. Why is this government refusing to call America and Israel out over their illegal war in Iran?
The threats to bomb civilian infrastructure like bridges, like power stations, the bombing of a primary school. These are things we shouldn't be needing legal advice to condemn. They are absolutely disgraceful. Donald Trump's tweet over the weekend sent a shiver down my spine. It was absolutely wrong. And any New Zealand politician who refuses to condemn that needs to have their conscience checked.
Isn't hoping Trump can get himself out of the worst geopolitical blunder since invading Vietnam just vacant optimism here? He has clearly miscalculated and only seems capable of doubling down rather than de-escalating.
It's not clear that Donald Trump ever had a clear idea of what he was trying to achieve. He never had a clear understanding of what he was taking on. He never had a clear exit strategy. He never had any kind of mandate to do it. And the New Zealand government still doesn't seem to know what its position on this illegal war is. It is an illegal war. A primary school has been bombed. We should be saying very loudly and very clearly that we are opposed to this war and we find the actions here are repugnant.
Henry Cook was reporting from the Post this afternoon that the Prime Minister is still unsure about the bombing of that school. What about not bombing primary schools is difficult for the Prime Minister?
Well, it seems the Prime Minister's still waiting for the Americans to justify why they bombed a primary school. You shouldn't need to wait for justification from anybody to say that bombing a primary school is just unacceptable.
Right? Winston Peters is in Washington right now. Is he there to denounce American foreign policy, or is he there to get his Five Eyes marching orders?
Winston Peters should be in the United States right now to condemn the actions that the US and Israel have been taking in Iran, to make it clear that the New Zealand government has no support for the Iranian regime, that we want to see international law returned to. That is how we deal with these issues, not through unilateral actions where there is clearly no mandate, there is clearly no plan, and the upheaval and the turmoil that has been caused as a result is being felt all around the world, and particularly here in small countries like New Zealand.
As the leader of the opposition, you're briefed on military intelligence matters. Are New Zealand SAS troops involved in any Iranian actions, and should New Zealand keep out of this militarily?
Certainly not that I have been briefed on. New Zealand should absolutely keep out of this militarily. Any action that New Zealand takes here should be following a United Nations mandate. We have previously said, even in conflicts where we've disagreed, once the United Nations involved, once there's a United Nations mandate, there can be a role for peacekeeping, for humanitarian support and so on. But it shouldn't be to backstop unilateral action by the United States and Israel.
Isn't there a deeper message here that geopolitics is reshaping the energy market permanently, meaning EV subsidies, solar subsidies, and 100% electrification of the economy from 100% renewables is a national strategic interest? Is Labor ready for that challenge?
We were working on that challenge when we were deposed from government in 2023.
Yes.
We had one of the fastest uptakes of electric vehicles in the world, and the current government, on coming into office, absolutely tanked that. We were moving to 100% renewable energy for our electricity.
Yes.
They tanked that plan and instead wanted to import liquefied gas from other places around the world. What a dumb idea that's proven to be. We had plans in place around solar. We had plans in place around making sure that we were tackling, climate change and moving to sustainable fuel sources. And you know what? We even had a plan in place to build a 70 million litre strategic reserve of diesel so that if there was a sudden supply shock, we'd be ready for that. And guess what? Shane Jones cancelled it.
What do you think of and make of Shane Jones' constant attempt to try and blame Labor for the closing of Marsden Point? We all know that's not true. That's just not true. It wasn't Labor's responsibility.
Because Shane Jones is trying to deflect attention for something that was his responsibility, which is making sure that we were having sufficient supplies, reserve supplies of fuel. And he cancelled the plan to build a 70 million litre strategic reserve of diesel so that in the event there was a supply disruption, we wouldn't be in the position that we're in now. And now he's trying to find someone else to blame. The reality is Marsden Point was a private business.
Yes.
We did get advice on whether there was a case for government intervention. And actually the advice came back and said you could provide more fuel security by building a 70 million litre strategic reserve. So we agreed to do that, and Shane Jones cancelled it.
What do you think New Zealand should be doing with its voice on the global stage right now when we are seeing the kind of out-of-control aggression from America and Israel? We were really clear on denouncing Putin when he made an illegal act of war. Why aren't we doing that with our allies? Surely with our allies, we should be using our voice more.
New Zealand's never going to be the biggest, most powerful country in the world, but we can be a very powerful voice on the world stage by being principled, by being independent, by standing up for the things that matter to New Zealanders, like the fact that there should be rules, that everybody should play by those rules, that you shouldn't take unilateral action without a mandate, that you shouldn't bomb a primary school, that you shouldn't be disrupting every other country's trade for no particular reason whatsoever other than the fact that you felt like it. These are things that New Zealand should be clearly speaking out about internationally. And guess what? Our standing with the rest of the world would actually go up if we did that.
Right. Finally, Chris, last week we had enormous reaction to recreational fishing spokesperson Matt Watson discussing the deeply flawed fisheries bill that bends over backwards for commercial interests in a way that looks like naked corruption, banning public access to camera footage, expanding bottom trawling and fining anyone $50,000 for publishing camera footage that shows commercial fishing interests breaking the law. Many Kiwis are sick of a government legislating for their donors at the expense of the environment. What will Labour do differently on fishing to get the balance right between commercial interests and the rights of the recreational fishing community, many of whom are fishing just to catch kai for the whānau?
It's a really good example of where New Zealand First's actual priorities lie. They lie with the fishing industry, not with recreational fishers. They lie with big corporates rather than with sustainable environmental considerations. Yeah. Labour will return the focus back onto making sure that we're actually being sustainable in the way we run our fisheries and our other environmental resources. We've got to make sure that we're not running down fish stocks, that we're not bottom trawling and destroying the environment in the process, that we're not placing things like, digging up the ocean floor for minerals ahead of good environmental protection. All of these are the things that New Zealand First are promoting, and you can draw your own conclusions about what their motivation for that is.
Thank you, comrade. All power to your arm, Chippy. We'll see you again next month.
Good on you.
Kia ora. Okay, now to our political panel all-stars. Our first panellist is the union rep for Slytherin House. He makes Machiavelli look like a virgin, and he's the only New Zealand right-winger not on the Taxpayers Union payroll, perpetually joining us from a secure, undisclosed location for reasons we can't disclose. New Zealand Herald columnist Matthew Hooton. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show. One word to describe the week, please, sir.
Alarming.
Alarming.
Here at the secure undisclosed location, there's a bit of a bug going around, and I've been very, very sick. I've been in bed, quite sick, and I've had to take a whole lot of drugs to try and make myself feel better.
Of course.
None of them in English. All sorts of different languages. I haven't known what I've been taking. Anyway,
yes.
After a couple of days in a fever, I woke up and I turned on the TV and I saw the President of the United States giving a press conference with a rabbit. And obviously the drugs had some psychotic effect on me. And
Bring up that
picture.
Bring up that picture. Bring up the... Yeah. No. You saw him. No, that was it. That's Trump, and that's a bunny rabbit.
Oh, okay. So,
that
okay,
happened.
good.
That happened.
Seems like the drugs have worked, and I'm ready to go for the Tonight Show.
Our next panellist is a humble mother of 8. She's a working class legend, House of Gryffindor general, and high-ranking left-wing Jedi, all rolled into one. Labour Party finance spokesperson Barbara Edmonds. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome back to the show. One word to describe the week, please, ma'am.
Talofa lava, and Matthew actually stole my word. It is alarming. Trump's rhetoric on Iran is alarming. The rising cost of living for Kiwis is alarming. It's all alarming.
It is. And last but certainly not least, he's a lover and a fighter, but mainly a fighter. Former Labour Party Cabinet Minister, former Auckland mayoralty candidate, current Māori Party president. He took Mike Hosking to court for defamation and won, which is why he never has to buy a beer in any West Auckland pub ever. John Tamihere, kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show. One word to describe the week, please.
Oh, I got two. It's a surrendering of our sovereignty.
Yes.
And it plays out on a whole range of ways, from the sale of the mana of Parliament to oligarchs, to big corporates. Plays out in regard to having the FBI actually licensed to be here. It plays out in regard to the way in which we licensed the US to just take over all of our whole solar system, for the want of a better way to put it. Five Eyes they no longer need after that legislation was rammed through the House. I don't believe that Labor should have supported that piece of legislation. That's a fact. The other thing in terms of selling sovereignty is plays out over this war. You have to call it out, and you have to call the US out. And we shouldn't sell our sovereignty for greenbacks, or in the belief that that they're going to be around the corner. It's just not true. So when you do all this, they never had any license to do this. They never campaigned to do this. Yeah. So come the 7th of November, people have to make some very, very difficult decisions.
He's the Māori Bernie Sanders. Brothers and sisters, let's get into tonight's show, Issue 1, Week 6 of Trump's illegal war on Iran, and we are on the eve of destruction. What happens next? Issue 2, the last tanker has left the refineries, meaning diesel will now run out on May 22nd. Is the New Zealand economy ready? Plus, we'll have a final word at the end of the show, which each panellist gets to go to the mountaintop to see who breaches broadcasting standards this week. My money's on Barbara. Let's kick things off with Issue 1, and that is Week 6 of Donald's illegal war in Iran. And we now stand on the precipice of Trump promising to bomb Iran back into the Stone Age. Matthew, and I quote, "Open the effing straight, you crazy bastards, or you'll be living in hell. Just watch. Praise be to Allah," unquote. We are so far off the charts in terms of his behaviour now. What is most terrifying? Trump's desire to openly commit war crimes, or his attempt to use God to justify this war?
Well, he does also seem confused whether it's the Christian God he's appealing to or Allah, because he's used both in his recent messages. I think he is in a corner. I think he, for the first time in his life, is in a corner he can't possibly get out of. He does have to worsen the war. I mean, he began it as a proxy for the Israelis. I see people calling the Israelis a proxy for the United States. It's not. It's the other way around.
Yeah.
And every president since Carter has thought it might be a good idea to have a war with Iran. And in many ways, if you could have a successful war with Iran, it would be a good idea. But every single one of those presidents, George W. Bush, Jimmy Carter, Obama, Reagan, they all decided it's not a good idea. Only Trump was stupid enough to do this. But where he's at, Iran is more dangerous to the United States and the world than it was 6 weeks ago.
Right.
And he has to continue. Because if he were just to declare victory now and walk away, well, they'll keep the strait closed. They've still got their uranium. They're still attacking their neighbors. So he's in an absolutely impossible situation of his own making. And I mean, I don't know what to do. The key thing is not to get yourself in this position. as the previous 8 presidents have known. But he can't walk away. He is going to have to do roughly what he's threatening to do. He is going to have to overthrow that regime. He is going to have to find a way for the United States and its Gulf allies to secure the Strait of Hormuz. He doesn't have a choice in these things. And it has just shown those of us who have known since he came down the gold escalator, since he was first elected in 2016, that this man was a total disaster, a threat to world security, a threat to the United States' role as global hegemon. And all those predictions have come true. And here we are. And what do?
Follow-up question. The Iranians have been very clear that if Trump hits the energy or oil infrastructure, they will immediately target Saudi Aramco, UAE of refineries, Kuwait infrastructure and desalination plants, which could see oil spike to $160 a barrel in the first 24 hours. Will Trump back down? What do you think happens next?
Well, I don't see how he can back down, although he has extended and changed his deadline many times. He's completely incoherent about his war aims. So, who knows? But it just seems like we're in a tragedy caused by all sorts of forces. You can blame the global elite, its arrogance, of which I'm part, or the Democrats, or the or the liberal Republicans, or the people who've talked about the rules-based order, told people in Detroit that losing their jobs is a good thing because that's good for the overall world economy, which of course it is. And that led to the rise of Trump, and here we are. And there's no real ability to back down by either side. Obviously, the Iranians have no incentive to back down whatsoever because they are winning.
Right.
Barbara, that's the truth of the matter.
Barbara, New Zealand champions the rules-based order because, as a small nation, laws and rules matter. But Trump's dangerous foreign policy escalation has disastrous implications for people far away who have had no hand in the making of this war. How important is it for New Zealand to be using our global voice on the international stage right now?
Well, you heard Chippy say it just a little at the start of your show. It is so crucial and so important. We cannot step back away from this international-based rules order. And the reason being, again, is both economically, we're dependent on trade, but also we are that smaller country at the bottom of the world, but doesn't mean that we don't have a big voice on a bigger stage. So for me, there's no military solution to this.
Right.
The civilian deaths, the bombing or the threats to bomb infrastructure, which will lead to civilians or deaths or humanitarian issues, none of that is excusable. None of that should be happening. So we need Winston Peters, who's already on his way to the US, to make sure it's really clear what New Zealand's position is. And even though Luxon may not be clear, I'm pretty sure that New Zealanders across the country do not want primary schools to be bombed, do not want to start off a huge war within the GCC and the Middle East. So, some human leadership is needed here, not a robot that just reads the key lines.
Follow-up question. How assured are you that Winston Peters will raise these concerns in Washington tonight? Will the first question he asks Marco Rubio is to define a woman?
Well, I mean, you can define a woman as a person who gets paid less than a man.
Oh!
But
good.
Anyway,
Love it.
We go back to, my hope is that he does, and I'm forever an optimist. But you look at the rhetoric from this government in the last 2.5 years, and I don't have much confidence in it. But he should be saying, return back to diplomacy. You can't win your way out of this war without huge civilian deaths, without huge humanitarian crisis. You are the leaders of the first world, so start to show that.
John, is that sound I hear David Lange turning in his grave? What has happened to New Zealand's independent foreign policy?
Well, I said at the opening of the show, we've surrendered our sovereignty, continue to do so. I don't know. Well, I do know what the drivers are, and it's to corporate greed. See, the problem we have under the present leadership of the present government, and I've made this point before, and I won't labour it, but if you have a look at who are the big winners out of this coalition deal in the first 2.5 years, in priority of order relevant to the House time, order papers, legislation through, the political game itself, it's Act first, New Zealand first, second, and Nationals coming up very, very poorly as third as a majority partner. So the leader of mergers and acquisitions busted the worst possible coalition deal we've ever seen.
Yeah.
The net result of that is that he is a part-time Prime Minister with 2 other Prime Ministers. It's the first time our Constitution has gone down that track. So, and they've surrendered our sovereignty on a number of levels. Peter's going to the States is merely an election year party for him, right? Saying, and it's all about New Zealand first. It's got nothing to do with Aotearoa Nui Tonu. It's got everything to do with promoting New Zealand first at the expense of national and act. And you start to see that play out in a number of polls where he's positioning himself 6 months out. Remember, only 6 months out from the next election. House rises September. Then 5 weeks of an election campaign. So we're really starting to move into that space. Now, we've got major problems. He will not call the Yanks out.
No, he won't.
Otherwise, he wouldn't go there.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So he's going up there. The final thing I'll say is that there's no doubt that Trump is between a rock and a hard place, and he now wants to be the new leader of the new crusade. I think that's over 65% of Americans still go to and frequent churches every Sunday.
Yeah.
So they're a huge voter base.
Follow-up question. If Trump really strikes Iran and Iran responds by targeting Ras Tanura, the largest oil terminal on Earth, that's 6,500,000 barrels per day offline. And if the Houthis close the Red Sea, that's 2 choke points shut with no precedent in history. Goldman Sachs predicts within 5 days of an escalation that oil will hit $200 a barrel, while physical crude would hit $250 plus in Asia. How crazy is Trump willing to get here?
Well, everything he's done has had an adverse impact on every country in the world. It's the first time that, it's a megalomaniac just waving his own wand around the White House and everyone folds. It's the most disgraceful form of leadership in the international rules-based system that we've ever seen, in terms of him not being called out properly by either the EU or alternatively Asia or alternatively ourselves. It's just there's this old saying, corruption and wrongdoing occur when honest people remain silent. We've remained silent. It's a disgrace. We should be ashamed of it.
Matthew, Goldman Sachs put out an analysis that the planet faces a structural supply gap when it comes to petrol. The export reduction and rerouting fixes are one-time adjustments. They say if Persian Gulf flows remain near zero, there is no further offset available and outright supply rationing becomes inevitable. Is the market refusing to acknowledge this because the damage is so catastrophic that no one wants to price it in?
Well, I think the market continues to take too seriously the utterances from President Trump, because both equity and debt markets tend to move based on his statements. Now, I'm just a humble philosophy professor or whatever I am, and a columnist. But if I was working for a major investment fund, I think I would try to ignore the utterances of the president and just look at the realpolitik of the situation and try and make judgments on what's going to happen based on that. And I think that would probably be a more successful medium-term investment strategy than relying on anything that lunatic has to say. And as I say, I can't see that the United States can avoid using vastly more force than it has so far, because that strait does have to reopen for the interests of the United States and the world, although mainly of the world. The United States is self-sufficient in oil.
That's right.
That was a decision George W. Bush took.
Yes.
I mean, he was an oilman and he was doing his own adventures in the Middle East. And so they aren't domestically as dependent on this as places like Japan,
That's right.
South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, India. So at a certain point, I mean, this is just dreadful situation. At a certain point, if the United States were to walk away and Iran were to keep the strait closed, then you're going to have to see the rest of NATO go to war to reopen it.
Jesus.
No, they'll negotiate.
So, or they could negotiate it. That the Europeans are better at that. Obviously, more sophisticated negotiators than Trump.
Yes.
No one's ever going to negotiate with Trump again, including the Iranians. How can you believe him?
Barbara, Nicola was told RNZ this morning that she has never felt so dependent on the feelings of one administration. Is that fair? I mean, New Zealand has no influence over Trump's. Are our hands tied here?
We can still stand up and say what's right. And the fact is, right from the very beginning, that the position of the government was so cloudy and so murky. You know, they should have condemned the attack on Iran right at the beginning. They could have condemned that and also be supportive of Iran deciding its future. But they were incredibly murky, and with a part-time Prime Minister, it's been interesting to see a Minister of Finance having to step up to provide commentary on it.
John, if no one...
Can I just ask, though, in all seriousness, what is the point in us expressing our views? I mean, we have this New Zealand conceit that someone's going to listen. If someone were to listen in some way, that would be.
Let me answer that.
If it were the case that no one would listen at all and do nothing, that'd be okay too. But what do we gain?
John, should we roll over?
Let me answer that. We've already got a precedent, okay, and it's our nuclear-free legislation.
Amen.
Now that reverberated around the world, and led us into some great places and spaces, and
universal suffrage.
We were highly regarded and a whole bunch. I won't go that far back, but I mean,
but you could 40-hour working week.
Well, you could go back and list, tick a whole lot of boxes. But the fact of the matter is that when you do things on a scale like that, and you mentioned the Longi government, we're world renowned. Okay, so small countries can have big voices.
No one's heard of that policy.
Small countries can have big voices. They all did, and the Yanks took great umbrage with it at the time. Yes, they did.
The only people that listen.
I think you must have still been at bloody Auckland Boys Grammar. But the point is,
there is not a single country in the whole world that followed that policy, and there's not one fewer nuclear weapon as a result.
Stop undermining our national identity. John.
I can speak for myself, Bomber.
If no one can stop Trump, where does it end? Where does it end?
Oh, no, you now have, in effect, the days of the Caesars. Okay, so for the first time, we've now been driven back. I'm talking globally, and in the known world, wherever the Romans wanted to assert their mana, they just did so, and they did so with brutal violence, okay, overpowering violence. Yeah. That's what you see with this bloke, and I don't see it stopping anytime soon. What's remarkable to me is his numbers in his base still holding so strong.
Yeah. It's like
incredible.
A cult. It's like a cult, isn't it? Quick round. What will the price of a barrel of oil be by the end of this week, Matthew Hooton?
$140.
Barbara.
130 to 150.
John.
In that range.
Jesus.
No, it'll go over $4.
That's going to hurt.
No. Diesel will go over $4 a litre.
Yes, you think so?
Oh no, it's on the way. Well, here's the other thing. You raised a number of issues. So we don't get the truth here.
Yeah.
Right, we don't really know.
We don't.
What force majeure clauses are going to be triggered?
That's right.
Korea is now stockpiling itself.
Yes, that's right.
It's one of our biggest providers, refiners.
Yeah.
We then try and take the load off by saying we're going to go to dirty diesel,
Yes.
or dirty imports, the aligning with the Australian quantity and quality. So this government's done everything it can to hide the inevitable. We've got some major problems coming, and they're not going to be fixed, even if he bombed them back to the Stone Ages tomorrow.
Right.
Right.
Comrades, we need to move on to issue 2 tonight, and that is the impact of all of this on the New Zealand economy. The last scheduled fuel tanker to arrive as of last night was the Forever Glory, which is coming from South Korea and is scheduled to dock in Tauranga on April the 22nd. Without new ships or rationing, diesel will run out on May the 22nd. Is the New Zealand economy ready? Barbara? Many whānau were just holding on by their fingernails from the cost of living crisis. Now they're being punched in the guts by fuel prices. What do you say to those Kiwis who are just feeling so battered and bruised right now?
What can you say to them from opposition other than November the 7th? You know, I mean, that's the incredibly hard thing and frustrating thing as being an opposition spokesperson. As much as you can hold the government to account, ask them questions on the floor of Parliament, ask them questions through the media, they have the responsibility to look after everybody, not just their mates.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Yeah.
And, you know, right from the very first week had been saying, you know, the food banks already have huge significant demand.
Right.
Put more money into that. You know, the accounts that came out last week showed that there was an underspend of $300 million in community services. You could put some of that money towards that. You could put some of that money towards budgeting financial services. But it's going to be incredibly tough for our families and for individuals, you know, even our pensioners who they have no other income other than the pension. It's going to be a really rough time for our whānau right throughout the country.
Winter is terrible.
Follow-up question. David Seymour says he's optimistic New Zealand won't face fuel rationing because new suppliers are coming to Singapore and South Korean refineries. But the bottlenecks will still exist. And even if those refineries do manage to find replacement sources, the cost to the end user in New Zealand will be astronomical. Are we ready for the inflation wave that comes with this?
Remember, that's just the feedstock to the Asian refineries that we depend on, so mainly Singapore, South Korea.
Yeah.
We also have to remember that petrochemicals, naphtha, you know, all the other products that are made through petrochemicals, you know, food packaging. I understand, you know, China, for example, will be using some of the naphtha to use for auto services, for chips, etc., etc. It just feeds right through the economy. Hence why you don't kick the hornet's nest in the first place, but that time has passed.
John, Māori are poorer than the rest of the population and oil price surges are impacting them harshly. The PM forgot he had any Māori in his cabinet with Tova on breakfast this morning. Have Māori been forgotten again by this government?
Oh, no, they haven't been forgotten. The boot's been put into them from the get-go in this government. Everything Māori's been defunded and so on and so forth. And if you stand for anything near a political voice, you get targeted with all sorts of inquiries and investigations.
As you know.
Because in this democracy, you're not allowed to hold, without fear or without favour, a political belief, unless you're a funder of the present regime. Look, I just think that where we are heading as a country is despicable. And what Labor did, to their credit in the pandemic, was the excise tax on petrol was dropped.
Yep.
Well, not completely, but I think it was 30 cents in the litre.
And public transport free as well.
Yeah, well, it was only for a limited time, just to get... See, I'm really worried about poor people, not just Māori. And guess what? Who the poor people are? It's around 70% of this nation that are on the line. Yeah. Now, what's going to happen is that this winter, their power costs are through the roof already.
Yes.
Right, so you add petrol, the flow-on impacts that Barbara's just talked about, petrol is involved, or petroleum products is involved in everything we have, right? Plastics all the way through.
Yeah.
So if this thing continues, but it can't not have an impact, okay? It's going to have a spike sooner or later because who's going to carry all the rest of the costs?
Yeah.
So this winter is going to be a very difficult winter for a lot of Kiwis. And they're going to need some form of relief package.
Follow-up question. Winston said in the second week of this conflict that it would end soon. 4 weeks later, it hasn't. Will New Zealand First be panicking over how instrumental they were in not rebuilding that diesel storage if diesel does run out? I mean, shouldn't they be a little nervous?
No, not really, because when you are a Peters or a Seymour, you're not Labour and you're not National. So you can walk into a room full of, say, just pretend there's 100 people. I can walk into that room and turn 90 of them off, just like that. But I just need to know the 10 that I need.
Yeah.
You see? And that's the difficulty with the larger parties. They just can't game it in terms of the cohort of voters that they're targeting. And so both ACT and New Zealand First understand their cohort. They're fighting over the same cohort too.
Yeah. Matthew, you were one of the very first commentators in New Zealand casting doubt on the government's upbeat optimism over what the head of the IEA says is the worst energy crisis ever. What happens when they run out of road?
Well, it's a catastrophe. As it's just been said, petroleum is used in the production and distribution of everything. And with COVID, our ability to produce and distribute food to supermarkets was not harmed at all. In fact, I remember that time the food in the supermarkets was superb because we got the export orders that we normally wouldn't have available. Right. So, but this is the opposite. This is going to be very difficult for food to be distributed when this occurs. There's not much that can be done. We don't have storage capacity in New Zealand, for better or worse. We have a just-in-time system. So if we were rationing now, it wouldn't be achieving anything. There's nowhere to store what was being saved. So I think we have to continue until such point as we reach the crisis, and then we are going to have to begin rationing. In the meantime, using the price system does make sense because you want to try and lower demand and make sure it goes to those businesses that need it most. But once we do move to a rationing situation, then I think there would be a case for perhaps reducing that excise tax because, at that point, it's no longer the price that's deciding who gets it. I'm encouraged with a couple of things I've heard from Barbara. I thought that idea with food banks and so forth is a good idea. It's better than deciding to give every business in New Zealand massive amounts of money that they don't need and causing a lot of inflation. So it was good to see some prudence there. I also like Chris Hipkins' idea, which I hope the government takes up, that look, we aren't moving to rationing yet, but it probably is time for the government to say how that would work in some detail so that those individuals and businesses who aren't going to have access to diesel know it in advance. I guess from the government's perspective, though, as soon as they make an announcement like that, the lobbying to be added to the list would become so intense. But apparently they're consulting with industry, and I think it is time in the next week or so for the government to give more information on how level 3 and 4 would work.
Follow-up question. US officials are modelling $250 a barrel oil, and Goldman Sachs are predicting a 30% chance of a global recession if the conflict continues for 2 more weeks. Are you seeing that sense of urgency from Prime Minister Chris Luxon?
Well, no, but I'm seeing it, I think, from both Nicola Willis and Shane Jones, who are
the de facto
leading
Prime
the
Minister,
response
yes,
in the absence of
actual
prime ministerial leadership. And when I've watched them, it was a bit like watching Jacinda Ardern at the peak. I've changed my mind on some of the issues, including that rationing one, as a result of what Nicola Willis and Shane Jones have had to say. So that I mean, that's leadership in a way. Jacinda Ardern was able to change people's minds. That does need to be leadership. That does need to be explaining the situation and how it'll be managed as soon as possible. But I think the government's quite right. There's nothing that can be done. It doesn't matter how high the price goes. If we can't get the stuff, it doesn't matter if it was $3. It doesn't matter what we have to pay. I mean, there just won't be enough diesel in the country.
Barbara, the $50 a week for many working families. Hey, look, that any little bit can help, but the beneficiaries have been left out. That support care workers have been only given a little bit more. I just don't think that New Zealanders, after the way Labour looked after them during a crisis, they're looking at the way the National Party are intending to look after them. And the difference to me is when New Zealand fell over with COVID, there was Jacinda and Grant to help us to our feet, dust us off, give us a bit of a cuddle, and say, hey, look, it's all on the credit card. When New Zealand fell over with the fuel crisis, you've got the Prime Minister, you've got Nicola Willis cursing us for falling over, giving us a bit of a boot, stop being so bloody weak and soft, and we're going to let the free market decide. I think Kiwis expect from their government to be looked after in a crisis. This government is walking away, isn't it?
Well, if anything to go by, and I know I've been told don't read the comments, but you read, a number of news articles or you see it being shared on social media, usually the first emoji, if it's not a laughing one, it's an angry face. And, it's got huge engagement, and if that's a polling of 30,000 people who have engaged with a particular news item and this is them providing their stakeholder feedback, it's not going down well.
Yeah.
And, the mileage issue for care and support workers, that'd been raised 2 weeks ago, and then the government finally did something about it last week. But for 2 weeks, there have been care and support workers who basically have been paying to go to their own job. And having to decline jobs as well. That's not what you want from a service. And, these are very incredibly hardworking people, mostly women, again, pay equity, again,
yes.
Things could have been a little bit better if they had been able to settle their claims. But it's just the constant knock-on effect and feeling like you can't get ahead, you don't have anybody supporting you, which is why, you're going to go to Australia like, thousands of Kiwis have in the last year.
Quick round to you all. Will Trump launch an attack on Iranian energy and power infrastructure tomorrow? John Tamihere.
I don't know about tomorrow, but I can't see him not doing it.
Right. Matthew, is it going to happen tomorrow?
Next 36 hours, yep.
Jesus. Barbara?
I'm hoping not.
Hoping. Okay, comrades, we need to wrap the show with a final word. Barbara, your final word this week is, please?
First of all, I had a question right from the beginning. If you don't believe in Santa, does that mean you don't believe in the Easter Bunny as well?
It's not so much that I don't believe in Santa. I just want to be the anti-Santa. So I want to steal from rich kids and give to poor kids. That's what I want to do.
Oh, so first from a high level, the Warriors didn't have a very good game in the last weekend. It'll be interesting to see if Luke Metcalf, I'm trying to look for the positives
Sure
here.
you are. It's good.
I'm
It's
trying
good
to
that
see
you
whether
are.
Luke Metcalf will recover from his hamstring injury. But, I still have faith in the Warriors, but the Storm's going to be really hard to beat. In relation to the fuel crisis, we need to see the government showing clarity, showing leadership, and actually really actually wanting to do something for all New Zealanders, not just some.
John, your final word this week, please, sir.
Oh, I just can't believe how buggered it is. From the get-go, this mob, attacking other communities,
Right.
burning bridges amongst people, and at a time when you need solidarity and a unity of purpose, you've got people that can't lead that.
No.
So look, we're struggling to understand the plan, let alone understand that they don't have the salespeople. Okay, so it's just a straight business politics at the end of the day. And when you look at the present regime and the way they conduct themselves, you can have no confidence.
Right.
And that's why tax takes down. That's why everyone's putting their checkbooks away, credit cards away, everything else, and just hoping like hell they can weather this storm. Remember, it was survived 25. Right.
Now we're all dicks at 26. Yeah, I know. We're screwed. Matthew, your final word this week, please, sir.
Where are the Greens? Is my question. Like George W. Bush deciding that the US should become energy independent, the Greens have been right. I hate to say that. They've been right all along on the question that New Zealand should move to renewables, 100% renewables or beyond, and that New Zealand should use our natural resources and try and get off oil. Now, I expect the Labour Party to say when there's a crisis, let's give some more money to the poor.
We do. That's what we expect.
And I expect them, and I expect Te Pāti Māori to say, let's give even more money to the poor.
Yay!
Or whatever. But we've seen the Greens trump both of them, and they want to give more money than anybody else to the poor, and so that they can buy petrol. Now, I would have thought this is the time for the Greens. Remember, their votes don't come from the poor, they come from the rich. This will be the time for the Greens to double down
Your
on
wife
what they
votes
have
for
been
them.
saying for 20 or 30 years and say, look, we were right, and now we have to move urgently to deliver the green agenda. But they seem to prefer just to be communists instead than Greens, it seems.
Thank you, comrades. And now to my final word, brothers and sisters. The same ACT-backed pro-war Iranian Zionist activists who recently protested outside the anti-war meeting in Mount Eden have threatened to counter-protest this Saturday's massive anti-war protest 2 p.m. at RTS Square by calling on the US and Israel to continue their illegal war on Iran. I can't remember when there was a pro-war and anti-war protest at the same time. Comrades, we cannot allow pro-war activists to shame us in our own city. We cannot simply stand by and allow America and Israel to wage an illegal war against the Iranian people. Whatever misgivings we may have of Iran's theocracy, bombing for peace is no solution. New Zealand has a long and proud anti-war history. We are a nation of pacifists who have fought for real peace, not the pretense of peace. Those Iranians protesting against our calls for peace need to appreciate that New Zealand is a democracy, not a kingdom. They want to change Iran from a theocracy to a monarchy. That's not much progress. The destiny of the Iranian people should be decided by the Iranian people, not Trump or Netanyahu. Comrades, you are being hit in the pocket every day by Trump and Israel's illegal war. 2 p.m. at RTS Square this Saturday, all the whānau must come together. History is watching. Let it see. We disagree with using violence against our fellow human beings. In solidarity, the revolution continues. Ka pai Aotearoa. See you 2 p.m. Saturday in Auckland at RTS Square.
The Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. The Bradbury Group is an independent podcast through the Rover Network, sponsored by Wātea News. Everything on the show is an opinion and shouldn't be taken seriously enough to attempt defamation action against us. We were joking. We're never serious about anything, and officially, a small weta in Avondale is legally the